So now we get to the main part of the presentation. I'm Jeremy Carlo, Programs Chair. So this is a topic I've been looking forward to for quite a while. Maybe a little bit different if you're used to the recent, state of astrophysics and black holes and cosmology. Something a little bit different. So I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Lowell Gustafson from Villanova University. And he's done a lot of work with Brian Ampols. Brian's kind of been through the ringer the last couple of months, so I think he'll be providing moral support for the most part. So Lowell is actually a professor of political science. All right, you can prepare your rotten fruits. He did his undergraduate work at North Park College and then did his PhD at the University of Virginia. So he's been a professor of political science at Villanova for, let's not say how many years, some number of years. And he's been great to work with. I know we've done some guest lectures for each other at various points, trying to find some intersections between various topics. And that's one of Lowell's big things, trying to identify intersections between various subjects, even, deigning to come into the science building once in a while and dragging a few of us over to the arts building. So that's always been interesting. Brian is a long-time traveler to the Mesoamerican region. He's been a participant in the Maya Studies group at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as at the University of Texas. So Lowell and Brian are both very interested in Mayan culture and their views of the cosmos. So please join me in welcoming Lowell and Brian for tonight's talk.
Can you hear me all right? Does this come through? Yeah. I know you're really excited to hear that I teach political science, because the one thing you came to hear is some contentious talk about politics. You haven't had quite enough of that recently. But Jeremy has reminded me maybe that's not the best thing to do right now, so I'll turn it back. Anyway, thank you very much, Jeremy, for a very kind introduction. Thank you for all being here. And I really want to thank Brian, my friend for decades now. We have shared an interest in Maya studies for a long time, doing a lot of different things together, and it's really been fun to work with him on our presentation. There's always a danger in giving a professor a microphone, because once we open our mouths, it's very hard to shut them. But when I finally do end my spiel, which will take a while, I will turn to Brian for any concluding comments, and I usually do turn out the lights. So in any case, as Jeremy said, I teach in political science. Now, political science, we both teach in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and by sciences, we usually mean the natural sciences. Stuff that Jeremy does, physics and astronomy and biology and chemistry. Those are real sciences. Then they're over in the Mendel Hall, named for Gregor Mendel, the guy who did all the experiments on peas. Then we have an open space, a divide between the other half of the college, which is where I live. That's the liberal arts side. This is where the people who study history and literature and theology and politics and all of these humanities are usually, and the social sciences. But frankly, those of us in the social sciences know painfully little about the natural sciences, and I really do think that what Jeremy's been willing to do is to look for those intersections. Has been enriching for us. In any case, what in the world is a guy who teaches in the liberal arts side of the house talking here about astronomy, which is in our college studied in the other building where we don't do these things. They look into telescopes. You look into telescopes or microscopes, or they carry out experiments. We don't do that stuff. We keep our nose in a book. We go to libraries. We don't look up to the skies, God forbid. We just keep our nose down in the books. So, and we're interested in written texts. So these are two different worlds that we live in. One of the topics that I've enjoyed, along with my friend Brian, is our ancient cultures. And among them, the Maya culture. I'm going to tell you why I think our interest in Maya studies has led me here tonight, why I actually care about astronomy, which is quite a revelation for me, because I never thought that I did. In part, I didn't look up in the skies for good reason. I grew up in Chicago, and at Chicago, when my wife and I would take the walks at night, when we were there, and not dusk, but at night. And Chicago has not only light pollution, but good old-fashioned air pollution. So happily, the skies above Chicago are not that tedious, night after night, dark blue, just always dark blue. In Chicago, it's orange. And it's very pretty. It's not very good for looking at stars. You don't see an awful lot of stars when you're in Chicago. It's better here. We live just a little ways from here. But we don't have orange skies around here. But we've got a lot of light pollution. I mean, I do see some stars with a naked eye. I've never seen the Milky Way. I don't know, maybe somebody else has seen that, but I haven't seen that. So maybe it's in part because it hasn't been as visible as it was when I finally got my first beginner's telescope. They all told me I should get an 8-inch Dobson, and when I looked through it, I was amazed at how many stars there are to look at. But in any case, it's the journey from our interest in ancient Maya culture to talking about contemporary astronomy, and then what do these modern natural scientists have to say to us? In any case, this is sort of here the topic. This is not a Maya thing. By the way, is there a, how do I advance this? Is it just the this one here? Okay. This is sort of the way the Maya imagined their world. There's kind of three tiers, right? There's the skies, there's the earth, and then there's the underworld, and that's how they're imagining the world. And then something's got to hold up the sky, so they have the world tree at the center of the world. And basically, almost every city, every Maya city, considered themselves to be at the center of the world, so they all had a world tree to hold up the sky. And this is more the type of what did I do? Of work that they did. Now let me see if I can. Here's a few topics that I want to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about observations and stories. What are the stories we tell about the stuff that we observe? All right, so and then we've had examples here a few months ago. We had a very nice example of stories and observations from ancient Greece and early modern Europe. I want to talk just briefly to remind you where Mesoamerica comes from, what my original interest in Maya politics was, and how that led to an interest in Maya cosmology, and then an interest in asking about, well, so how do our scientists, who like Jeremy, then lead those of us in the humanities to think about what stories we tell currently. So that's what I want to try to get through. So and you remember Ray here just back in June, Ray Harris gave us a talk on really ancient Greek, ancient Roman, but also early modern
and the early modern European system. So here we have a picture of Perseus, and here's a great warrior, and you've got a decapitated head going on, very dramatic story. And now, Ray warned us a little bit against a flat-footed literalism. Did they really think that there was a person like this up in the sky, or is this a metaphor? Is this a meaning? Is this a teaching that we can draw from the stars? You need a little bit more complex view about all of that. And then when we look at the fuller range of beings which the mythology saw in the skies, we've got bears and lions and dragons and or kinds of animals there, and the Greeks obviously found a lot of meaning in the sky. They found that over the centuries, really, when they were looking at the sky, they developed stories that were meaningful to them. And that's a little bit of the attitude that we want to bring when we're thinking about Mesoamerica. Okay, so Ray talked to us about the ancient Greek constellations, and we want to talk about the Mesoamerican ones, just as a bit of a reminder to you about how we get to Mesoamerica. First of all, of course, we had the breakup of Pangaea about 220 million years ago, where North and South America break away from Africa and Europe, and we have the opening up of the Atlantic Ocean. And then it was only 3 million years ago or so that we have further movements which lead to Central America connecting North and South America. 3 million years ago, there are our hominid ancestors in Africa, but there are no hominids, no beings that look at all like us living in the Americas. They're all in Africa, the Australopithecines and then Homo habilis and Homo erectus. The physical anthropologists tell us that they evolved in Africa. And it was not until starting around 70, 80,000 years ago that Homo sapiens started to migrate out of Africa. Homo erectus did earlier, but it seems as though they went extinct, along with any number of other of our ancestors or hominid species that lived before Homo sapiens did. Homo sapiens have been around somewhere between 200 and 300,000 years. And so finally, for a variety of reasons, some of them left Africa and took different routes. Siberia was a tough place to cross, but peoples were very adaptive, and they learned how to survive in that very hostile climate. And then it seems as though here in the last ice age, there were lower sea levels and higher glaciers, and so we had a land bridge across Beringia between Russia and Alaska. The reindeer apparently went across that, and some Homo sapiens followed them. Somewhere around 20,000 years ago, made their way into the Americas, and then over the next few thousand years moved all the way down to the southern tip of South America. And we're in Mesoamerica, in Central America, some 15,000 years ago or so, during which time, of course, they are hunter-gatherers. They are relatively nomadic, but they are looking at the skies and they're seeing correlations between what they observe. Now, remember, they're Homo sapiens. They're basically just the same as we are. They're just as smart, just as observant, and for them it's very important to see these correlations because it helps them understand when they should follow their available food supplies, when are certain foodstuffs going to be available, whether they're animals or whether they're plants. They're not available in the same places all the time, so you need to follow them. And observing the stars helps you to do that. It's the beginning of the practice of seeing correlations between what you're observing in the skies and then things which are very important to your survival here on Earth, or just your interest, I suppose, too. They seem to have been just as artistic and symbolic as we have been. In any case, they do gradually, somewhere 5, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, have an agricultural evolution, not revolution, but they gradually move into being more settled, and then intentionally engaging in agricultural pursuits. And again, paying attention to the correlation between seasons and what they're observing in the skies, and that this is a very important thing for them to know about. And
Culturalists before they moved from being more nomadic to being more settled, living in villages. During that time, we don't have evidence of this, but they're almost for sure looking at the skies and they see correlation. They're following foods. When are different foods available? Different types of agricultural goods or plants. When are certain types of animals available? They're attentive to seasons. They have to be. That's why they're moving. They're moving with the animals, and they're seeing a correlation between the seasons, when foods are available, with the skies for thousands of years. These are people, if you put them in a jacket and a t-shirt and gave them a haircut, they would look just like you and me. Homo sapiens, they're just as bright as we are. They're just as inquisitive as we are. They're just as observant as we are. And they're using their knowledge of nature, what they're studying, to make their survival possible. They don't eat unless they get the right seasons right and when they can find foods. That goes on for a long time before they finally start to become agriculturalists who start to settle down and grow crops, which takes a period of time. That's starting somewhere about 8,000 before the Common Era or so. And then the different cultures go through various times, which I'm not going to get into right now. But over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, we start to have more sophisticated, developed, stratified societies that develop. There we go. Okay. So, and this here, Guatemala, the Yucatan Peninsula, Central America, this is where the Maya and other civilizations live. Actually, the Maya are not the first ones. The kind of Generally speaking, the first great famous civilization is the Olmec. The Olmec for the Maya is like what the Greeks are for us. We like to build buildings. The Capitol building looks like a Greek or Roman building. We use the names of their constellations. So much of our culture now depends on what we've inherited from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. For the Maya, so much of what they did was inherited from the Olmec. But the Maya wrote a lot more stuff, and guys like me who like to read stuff find it more satisfying to study the Maya because the Olmec didn't write so much. But you have the Olmec here, and the famous Aztecs come after the Maya historically. There's a terrible movie by Mel Gibson called Apocalypto. I don't know if you happened to see that one a number of years ago, but he kind of stuck the Aztecs and the Maya and the Spanish all together in one movie. It's a little bit like having a movie with King Henry VIII hanging out with Woodrow Wilson or something like that. It was such a hodgepodge that it just sort of was like fingernails on a blackboard. But there were these different cultures, but just at different times here, which is important to remember. Okay, now. I didn't go down to study the Maya because I was interested in their cosmology or their views of the cosmos. Being a guy who liked good old-fashioned politics, I liked wars and conflicts between states. So I taught about Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian Wars, the long war between Athens and Sparta and all their allies in Greece 2,500 years ago. So I was interested in that. Or I taught Machiavelli's The Prince. He was advising the guy who was in charge of Florence and all of his wranglings with different city-states in Italy. There was no Italian Italian state, no Italian nation. There was no Greek nation for Thucydides or for Machiavelli. There were city-states. It was before nation-states. So I thought, what the little bit I know about the Maya would be an interesting non-Western case of a bunch of different city-states squabbling with each other, sometimes going to war against each other, establishing all kinds of political relationships with each other. That's why I went to Central America, and there was plenty to look at. When I saw some of these stela that they have, or the artwork they had, I thought, well, this is just what I was looking for. I mean, this is how leaders are usually portrayed. They're always standing. They're very dignified. They're just absolutely erect. This guy's got a shield here. He's got a spear. He's got some skull sitting on his skirt, and he's very thoughtfully standing on a prisoner who has shut eyes, indicating he's been executed already. Now, there's we have this idea in international relations about realism, which is the states are forever in a contest with each other over relative power. And I thought, okay, the Maya just like everybody else here. And then if you count, political scientists like to count. So if you count how many different types of conflicts and relationships there were among a number of Maya city-states, that you can get this over time by cartoon or 20-year periods, over periods of time. And you try to make some comparisons to understand what's going on in the Maya world and Maya politics with thinking about that. Or just some more examples. I mean, here you've got another fellow. He's standing here, and he's next to sort of a prisoner who's been stripped down, and his future is not looking bright. Or here, the same thing with this guy. He's got a couple of captives. So, if you think that we live in an era where there's a lot of conflict between states, well, nothing's new. So I was very happy. Okay, this all sounds very familiar to me. Here's another fellow in Palenque. He's been captured, and just demonstrations of this. And then trying to trace all of the different types of relationships. It's not just war and conflict and prisoners and so on, and this sort of thing. There's lots of, there's going to each other's, having leaders going to each other's states and observing their ascension to power, or paying tribute, or any number of types of relationships, because there is no Maya nation. There's no Maya state. There's lots of different city-states, a little bit like ancient Greece or early modern Italy, a little bit different from our system of nation states. They have city states. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff I was looking at. And again, just comparing all of these different types of relationships. But then I started coming across that the Maya kept referring to some of their wars as Star Wars. That was their sort of they have different glyphs for that. One of the I think great stories for me, one of the great detective stories are the brilliant people, Linda Shealy and Michael Coe and all kinds of people who have learned how to decipher Maya writing. And if history is the written record of the human past, history in the Americas goes back at least a couple of thousand years, because they're writing a lot of stuff, but they write differently. They don't have an alphabet. In fact, when Bishop Blanda, who was a Dominican priest, went there, he was kept asking the Maya what their alphabet was. And he asked in Spanish, what is A, what is B, what is C? They didn't know what letters were. They answered the best they could, but they had no idea what each other was talking about. It's a logographic system of different symbols and then prefixes and suffixes. But in any case, here you have glyphs from different cities. And one of the problems with Maya writing is that there is no central or Maya culture, there's no central organization of that. There's no overarching Maya state. So you have people who are writing and people who are trying to etch their ideas in different places at different times, and they're creative. They construct them differently. So sometimes it's difficult to sort that out. But in any case, these are so-called Star War glyphs. And the stars, more often than not, are Venus. There's not a clear distinction maybe between planets and stars. And so men aren't from Mars, they're from Venus. Venus is the harbinger of war. And most of the time, the Star Wars have taken place at the beginning of the way that they're calculating the cycles of Venus. And somehow these are particularly noteworthy types of conflicts. There's a war between Caracol and Tikal, and it was really harmful for Tikal for over a century. They didn't build any more monumental buildings. Their population declined. Some of their monuments, it would be like if somebody came in and tore down the Washington Memorial or something like that. Some of their major monuments were destroyed. So there are these examples of what they called Star Wars that were significant to them. Some of them, it led to where the blood was pooled and the skulls were piled. They're not always peaceful people. And then if you go through using some of that, you realize they talk about some conflicts in some ways and some conflicts as Star Wars. But for whatever reason, stars are playing a reason. There's a number of examples of this over time here. All right, so they're paying attention to Venus, and they're looking at how that develops. Obviously, they're looking at other celestial objects. The sun is the most obvious one. And they have symbols for the sun. So here's the sun, God, the spirit of the sun. The sun is really intense, very powerful, and so you try to give expression to that sort of power. They observe the sun, and they observe that the sun doesn't rise and set in the same location. It does set every day. That's why there's the cosmic monster. The sun dies every night, but is given rebirth. This is a big thing for the Maya, the idea of birth, life, death, and rebirth. These cycles that go on in all kinds of ways, and we see it with the sun. Every single day, we see it in all, they see it in all kinds of different scenarios where you have these ideas of interlocking cycles, but there's the daily cycle. And so you have early on in the nomadic period more, the idea of shaman. These are sort of mystical figures. They have different insights into reality sometimes because they ingest frog secretions and hallucinogenic enemas and so on. You get different views of that. But they also play an important role. Somehow you've got to imagine going from a nomadic life to a settled village life. That takes a lot of creativity. You've got to think differently than what you had thought of, like for thousands of years. So the shaman had been creative leaders in many respects. As they became more settled, and you start to have city-states instead of villages and more stratification in the societies, you start to have more full-time specialists in various areas. You get to have states. The idea of a state instead of a nomadic chiefdom that's a permanent, at least a relatively permanent position. And you have people who are priests and who the kings and the priests are distinct, but they are carefully studying, and they're looking at the correlations between the various cycles which they're seeing in the sky and how that affects them. The daily cycle is an obvious one. That's the first thing that that strikes that. But then exactly where the sun is settling is interesting to them. So you've got from shaman to priests, and you have a number of indications of how they are going to be carefully studying this, because it makes a difference. It explains when to plant, when to carry out your different cycles, and they have all kinds of obligations. But among them they are very attentive to calendrics, the combination between cosmos and time, what we would call astrology, because some of the correlations they make we think sound like kind of a stretch, but they're very interested in correlations between what they see in the skies and human life. As well as prophecy. That's what some of these Star Wars are indicating. It's maybe it's after the fact where they're saying this was a significant war. Maybe they're prophesizing, saying this is a good time to go to war, but they're connecting the skies with warfare. I won't get involved. This is their role in talking about sacrifice. Washoktun is one of the cities where this was first discovered, how attentive the Maya were to the changing locations of the rising and the setting sun. And so they have one a pyramid structure here with a camera now, and then they've got three over there, or there's a visual of that. This central one where you can stand there, and then you look at these three buildings on the other side. We know the reason for that, why we have the solstices and so on. This was obviously not how they saw that, but they did see the results of that, and they were very attentive to it. So the E group, which is just what archaeologists called it later on, this grouping of buildings which they made, they showed the lines of when there's the different solstices, how does the sun rise and set in different locations over time, and let's build our cities in ways that that correspond to that. We want what we build in this world to be consistent to what we're observing there, because there's important correlations for this, and we've had people look at this carefully. But this is just one indication. Now, what that means is you want where you live, the city that you build, city planning. They plan out their cities to be consistent with what they're observing in the cosmos. And they think it's very important for them to live in ways. This is traditionally right. One reason for observation. The Greeks did that too. They were looking at how the stars were placed to instruct them how to live. The Maya are saying, what we are observing up there in the world, how does this instruct us how we should create our cities and live our lives? And this would be one way to go about doing that. Jeremy was talking about the interest that our college has in the liberal arts and sciences, connecting these two layers. The idea of connections, I think, is very clearly made in Maya culture. They're doing natural observations, and they're saying, what does this mean for our lives? How we should live, how we should construct the ways that we build the cities that we live in. How do we put these things together? But that's what they're doing a lot of. And let me try to give a few examples of that. In addition to the sun, of course, there's the moon. They're very attentive to lunar cycles. They're counting that all the time. And of course, what they see in the moon, and once you see it, and maybe you've already noticed that, it's not just the Maya, other cultures do this as well in Asia and elsewhere. They don't see the man in the moon, they see the rabbit in the moon. And once you see the rabbit in the moon, it's hard to see the man in the moon again. Here's one of the codices, the Florentine Codex later on, in which the moon is imagined as the rabbit. I thought I had a different picture of that. Oh, yeah, you can kind of see somebody drew an outline of the rabbit here on the moon. The moon is associated with perhaps with a goddess, and she's given lots of different names depending on what city and what time period that you're in. Ischel is one of the common names for the moon goddess. Just keep in mind how she's being represented here with that netted skirt or outfit that she's got on. That will come up again a little bit later. Or here's another one of the glyphs, and there is Ischel along with a rabbit. This is the idea that we're associating animals like the Greeks did with celestial events. Here, this time, the moon is and what we have. Or here's another one. Sometimes it's easier to see it when you're drawing than the original. But we have now she's sitting in the crescent moon in the classic period, and they're observing. Now the Maya they have a mathematical system. They don't have fractions, so this would be more like our system. But we notice that a year is on average about 365.25 days. Lunar cycle on average a little over 29 days. So what that means to the Maya is that you've entered the 13th lunar cycle in a solar year. So 13 becomes, for us, it's an unlucky number, right? For them, it's a heavenly number. This is what the moon is telling us. It hasn't completed the 13th cycle, but it's entered the 13th cycle. And they see all kinds of correlations. One possible one, first of all, they don't have a decimal system. They don't have a system of 10, right? We go from 1 to 9, and then you go to 0, and you go to the next column, and you have a 1. They go from 1 to 20, and then you go over to the next column. Why use your fingers when you could use your fingers and your toes? It just makes perfect sense. And they say, here's a correlation. You've got 13. You're in the 13th lunar cycle, and that seems to sometimes have something to do with menstruation cycles. Then, the human gestation cycle period is, a total of 280 days, but you maybe don't recognize you've missed a period for a few weeks. And by that point, there's 260 days or so left. 13 times 20 is 260. Clearly, there's a correlation for the Maya here between the cosmos and the essential tasks of reproduction. So 13 becomes a number that is used in their architecture. So there's the nunnery quadrangle at Uxmal. This is a drawing of it, of course. This is a photograph of it. But they did paint their buildings. Now they're all these dull gray because the paint's almost all gone all the time. But here you have 13 entrances to the upper northern building. And it's not a nunnery. That's the name that the Spanish gave to it because they looked at it and they said it looks like a nunnery. It probably almost for sure was not used as a nunnery. We don't know what they used it for, but they didn't have nuns. So, and then you have 9 entrances to the southern lower building because there are 9 layers of the underworld of Xibalba. And then in the center, it's destroyed, unfortunately. The world tree, the column has tipped over, but they had the world tree in the middle of this. So they're recreating the cosmos here. It's the north, south, east, west directions, the 13 entrances to the upper northern one, the 9 to the lower southern one, and then the world tree, because of course Uxmal is at the center of the world, and that's where they're holding up the sky. Here's just another vision of that northern building with 13 entrances. Yaxchilan is just another example. It's another one of the cities. They too consider themselves to be at the center of the world, but they too are very interested in connecting the upper, the middle, and the lower levels of life. And they've got a couple of lintels which indicated their interest in this. So inside one of the lintels, of course, above a doorway, as you enter the room, which is dark, the idea was that there had been a ceremony taking place within this dark room. And you have this one fellow holding a torch, lighting up the room, and then this woman here carrying out this act of self-sacrifice, and it kind of makes us cringe here because she's drawing a rope through her tongue. That's no fun, and it's bleeding down the rope into a container at the bottom where the blood will be collected, and later it'll be burned so that the smoke goes up to the heavens to meet with the gods. This is not a punishment to her. This is an honorary position that she's carrying out. Most likely, she has fasted for a few days before this. She's probably engaged in dancing to rhythmic music. She's maybe taken some hallucinogens, and she's causing significant pain to herself. If I did all of that, I would see some really neat stuff. And she saw some really neat stuff, because the next lintel is there she is now. She's done with her self-sacrifice, and she's looking up. And what you've got here is this serpent, which is winding around, and then out of the serpent's mouth at the front, at the top, there's this fellow with a spear. He's not threatening her. This is the founder of the dynasty. This is George Washington appearing to whoever the first lady is to say, your husband has the right to rule. Now, why is the snake interesting? The snake, again, in a lot of our cultural thinking is a symbol of evil, and it's not that at all for the Maya. Snakes are really interesting to them because, first of all, every year they molt, their skin dies, and they have to get themselves out of it. They die and they give themselves rebirth. That's pretty cool. Clearly, it must be a symbol of femininity because they're very curvaceous in the way that they move. But most importantly, they live in all three levels. They can crawl down into the underworld, they crawl around on the ground, and they crawl up in trees. They combine the levels of the cosmos. And that's what this guy is doing. He's coming up from Xibalba and appearing above her in the cosmos to say that I'm giving political legitimacy to your husband because of what you have done. I watched the Eagles last night. I'm a big Eagles fan. I love ball games. I take it really seriously. Mesoamericans really took ball courts seriously. For them, it's virtually at the center of their religion. This is one of the ball courts in Monte Alban, another Mesoamerican, but not a Maya city. But there are ball courts in every city. They all have them. And it's all tied to their mythology of where did everything come from? Where did humans come from? And how should I live? And so it's not just winning and losing games. This is one in Copan dedicated by Washalaklahu Ba Kawil, or 18 Rabbit. Anyway, the ball game is played here, but it's also part of their creation stories, which maybe I'll get into if I have a little bit of time. But it's a place where there's burial. The sides of there can be, and this is a birthplace. So this is a place of death and of rebirth that they play out. In Copan, another story, which I'll put aside for now. That's Alter Q, which is an interesting story. This is associated with that creation story called the Popol Vuh. It's a real abbreviated version of that. The first set of hero twins go play ball, And it's a very thin membrane on the ball court, just above G bulba. And the terrible gods down there, the god of pus and the gods of jaundice and the gods of all kinds of ugly stuff, are really irritated with the hero twins who are playing ball above them. They're making a lot of racket. And they say, you guys come down here and face us. And they give them a series of tests. The boys fail all of those tests. And the cost of that is the gods of death kill them. I mean, if you go down to the underworld, we all lose we don't pass the test. So in any case, but one of them, his head is cut off and the skull is put up in a tree. Well, just because you're dead doesn't mean that you're gone. He strikes up a conversation with the chief daughter of the god of the underworld. She likes what he says. The Maya are a little bit prudish, so the skull spits in her hand and she becomes pregnant. And she has to go back for various reasons, she flees the underworld and goes to the mother of the hero twins who have been executed and says, I am now the mother of your grandchildren. Anyway, she has a second set of hero twins. They go and play ball when they get older. The gods of the underworld call them down. They pass all the tests, and the gods still kill them. The gods of the underworld always win. That's just the way it goes. Except these guys we know are really great because they're executed, they're burned, and then the dust is drowned in the river. So they're killed a few times over, but they resurrect themselves. And the short story is they figure out that they're really smart. They beat the gods of the underworld, and the first thing they do then is to go to the skeletons of their fathers, the hero twins who were killed, and they resurrect them. And they do that. So you've got a turtle shell with that break. And the turtle shell is the earth. So that's the ball court. And he's been down in the land of the dead. That's where the skulls are. Underneath the turtle shell, that's where the primordial waters are. And they carry out the whole point of all of this stuff is, how am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to do what the gods want me to do? And they want me to take care of not just the earth, but they want me to participate in the ritual of helping this process from death to rebirth. And the way that farmers have done this for century after century is to take those rock hard little seeds, which the Maya are sure are dead. They're like little stones. You've seen a corn kernel after the end of the winter. And they plant it, they carefully plant it, they take care of it, they cultivate it, they water it. And somehow if they carry out the ritual correctly, they participate in the act of resurrection. And it's marvelous, isn't it? I don't know if you like gardening, but I'm a really good gardener for about a month, and then the weeds win. But it's fun to raise things in the garden. This is what this guy's bringing a pot, and he's watering his father. And he's resurrected the father, who now is the seedling breaking up through the earth, and he's become the corn god. And so every time you eat those corn kernels, you are eating the body of the corn god. And it's a religious ritual that you're seeing. I want to run through it because I don't know how much time Jeremy's going to give me. But there's lots of great sites, but Palenque is one. It's got fabulous panels, all kinds of wonderful, very elegant stories, which I'm not going to get into. But the Temple of the Cross. This is one which is interesting here. This is one of the leaders of Palenque. But I want you just to notice the world tree here. It's rooted down there in the skull, just like that other guy was. Then it's growing up, and it's going up into the skies, where the principal bird deity lives. And then the foliage on either side, if you can see here, there's two heads there. That's because the Maya consider themselves to be the people of corn. Well, look, you've got a bunch of corn kernels right there. To be beautiful is to look like a cob of corn. They would tie gently. They would tie boards to their baby skulls to kind of make cone heads, because if you could look like a cob of corn, then you were really, really beautiful. But there's this idea that we have this, and I wanted to tie that together with one of my favorite pieces of art in the Maya world. This is the sarcophagus lid for Pakal. He's one of the famous kings of Palenque. And that's a picture of him. That's a long drawing of it. And you see, he's got the same thing. Most of the kings, remember, they're standing up straight and they're big and tall and powerful and something. Pakal, who's like the most important king in Pakal, he's not standing up big and strong. He doesn't have a shield and a spear. It's at a really dynamic moment, an incredible moment, because it's a moment of death. He is falling into the maw. You see those big jaws that are around him, down where the skulls live. The maws here are ready to eat him up. It's the moment of death, and of course that's what happens, right? We get buried and earth eats us, and we look like bones after a little while. So it's at that moment, and he's falling into it. But he's got that netted skirt. Remember how Ischel, the moon goddess, wore a netted skirt, and he's in a birthing position. He's not in that erect position. So he's wearing a female outfit in a birthing position at the moment of his death. But it's the moment of rebirth. That's what makes this such an exciting moment here, because he's combining this cycle of death, rebirth, and what's coming out of his abdomen except the world tree. And then the principal bird deity up in the skies. And then you've got the symbols for the stars on either side. He's going down into the underworld because he's dying, and he's giving rebirth to himself, just like women can do. He's saying, I've got the power of women, except they give birth to others. I can give rebirth to myself. You know, I'm pretty powerful and special if I can do that. And more to the point, my son is telling you that he's the one who's done all of this. He's saying, this is the lineage I come from. If this is what my father can do, this is why I should be king. Your father can't do this. Mine can, and that's why I ought to be king. This is political propaganda in my term, but it's linking this tying together of death and life and rebirth and the levels of the underworld with the skies is what they're trying to say. The Maya are very interested in many cycles of time, which they understand by what they're looking for in the cosmos. And they talk about Keen, that's the day, and of course that's the sun. Every day you have the sun. They have Winals, which can be a month of 20 days or Keens. You have a tune of 18 winals, which is more or less a year. You have a katun, which is a 20-year period, and you have a baktun, which is a 20 katun period of time. Some places, but not all places, go well beyond that, and they have a much larger periods of time. Here at Quirigua, that's this stela here in Quirigua, they have the time of 13 baktun, 13 0 katun, 0 tun, 0 winal, 0 keen. In other words, that's a date, and for 13 is that sacred number for them. So they're saying it's the last creation took place on that date, which is 130000. And then they count all of the days from then until whenever they are now in the ninth Baptune or whatever you have. And the creation date is on Forahau a Kunku. But in any case, that's the so-called long count. It's just the count of days. I mean, how many days has it been in the Christian calendar since Jesus was born? Or if you're in the Jewish calendar, how many days? What are we in 5785 now? I think. Yeah. So how many days has it been since the creation of the world in the Jewish calendar? But in any case, the Maya are telling us how many. They can tell you how many days it's been since the most recent creation. That they've inherited. The Olmec wrote down a date of 7/16/6/1618, which is the equivalent of September 1st, 32 BCE. So the Maya are inheriting this sense of counting the days from their ancient Greeks and Romans. One of the cities, Koba, really pushes it back because their idea was the most recent creation starts 13,000, but that's not the first one. In fact, you have a recurring I think the astrophysicists, they tell us that there's a Big Bang 14 billion years or so ago, and then there will be heat death or a big chill, and maybe it's one and done. We have one universe and then it's over and then that's it. Or maybe we have cycles, trillion-year cycles. Or maybe we have a popcorn multiverse with lots of universes going out. The Maya had all kinds of similar arguments about how many creations are there over time, and we're in just the most recent one. The most recent to 13th Baktun was in 2012. So some of the New Agers were really worried that this was going to be the end of time. Happily, it wasn't. But in any case, that's one calendar. That's the long count. Then they have the second calendar. There they have 20 named days with 13 numbers. Again, 13. You want to use a magic number. And if you put those together, then you have a 260-day calendar. So they have the Tzolk'in, or this second calendar, which they use. They have a third calendar, the Hab calendar. This time they have 18 months. Or renals with 20 numbers for each one. That gives us 360 days. Then they have that scary month, the YAB of 5 days. We have this, right? The old man on December 31st becomes the baby except that in 1999, remember, we were all sort of worried what was going to happen. Computers going to break down. We were going to have all kinds of mayhem with that time change. So we've had a little bit of this, but they were really worried. Now, they've got good reason to worry about a period of growth, but then a possible period of death. They live with hurricanes and earthquakes and droughts and all, famines, and death comes for the Maya. So you've got reason to worry about, will time renew? And is the cosmos, are you carrying out the obligations to the cosmos, to the gods, so that you can give rebirth to the next period of time? And if you don't carry out your functions, the gods are going to punish you. And that's what they do. Then you've got a fourth calendar. How many times one day in that second calendar will meet the same a particular day in that third calendar? That happens once every 18,980 days, or once every 52 years. Why do they have so many calendars? What's the point? Well, they're looking up in the sky and they're telling us, well, there's the lunar cycle and there's the solar cycle and there's Venus cycles, and they've got lots of other cycles that they're counting as well. And they keep track of all of this in various codices. They had a lot of books or codices. And Bishop DeLanda, who's actually a really good anthropologist, he wrote a lot of good stuff. He was one in the colonial era. But he did that for the purpose of converting the Maya. And then he realized that they hadn't converted completely. They were sort of syncretic. They were putting their old religion together with the new religion. He got really mad and he burned most of their books. It's one of those great historic tragedies. 4 have survived. And all of the others went up in smoke. And he was a little perplexed that they seemed so anxious about all of this being burned. But in any case, we have the Venus thing. So that's another. So there's all of these things they notice in the sky, all of these different cycles going on, all of which are accepting them. Then you got the Lords of the Night, which I won't go into, another way of counting time. Okay. They're looking at the skies and they're seeing what the correlations are with their world. And they're looking at what we call these different constellations, and they see other things. They see the maize tree and the turtle and the three stones of the hearth and peccaries and so on. And they are associating that sometimes with success in war. The king is going to bring fluorescence to the community if he wins in war. And of course, it's not just them. Why are we so successful? We beat the British in the War of Independence, and we beat the Germans in World War II and World War I, and we beat the Soviets in the Cold War, and that's why we're such a great nation. So we brag about winning wars too, but they certainly do. And this is a mural in Bonaparte about a battle that's going on there, and it's a beautiful set of paintings here. This is sort of the chaos of war. And then the next one is your attraction starts off looking at this kind of horrific scene, frankly. This is after the battle when the prisoners are being tortured and killed. Here you've got Mr. Fancy Dancy King. He's standing erect with his spear in the center, and then he's got his guys helping him. Then you've got the prisoners on the staircase. They're getting their fingernails pulled out. This poor fellow's been decapitated already. This fellow's begging for mercy. This fellow's already been killed. So that's what attracts your attention in all of this. And this is the king of Bonaparte bragging. I've won the battle, and my son now has the right to inherit my rulership after I'm gone. That's what the point of all of this stuff is. But you tend to then forget the cartouches up on top. And there what you have are the different cosmic structure which they saw at that time, where they looked up and what they saw were populating peccaries. Well, why not? And then they saw Mars and Saturn and the turtle, which is the belt of Orion. The claim is the stars were right, that there's a correlation between the cosmos and my success in giving fluorescence, rebirth to the community. And we're not going to die as long as you have me carrying all of that sort of thing out. I think I better start to bring this to a close, but when they looked up, they very often, they did, unlike me, they saw the Milky Way. I finally got to go up to Cherry Spring and actually see a whole lot of stars just with my naked eye, and it's fantastic, right? They looked up and they saw the Sock Bay, the Great White Wave. Here's we have to pass this around. They etched this on stone here, which is the nice thing that Brian is reminding me of. And of course, the Milky Way moves around. They were observing exactly how the Milky Way moved at different times. And when it moved under the ecliptic, they were wondering if there was perhaps, were they drowning? They were worried in that YM about maybe in that 5-day period, time would come to an end. They worried about, they experienced droughts and earthquakes and hurricanes and famine. They had experienced periods of death. And in a way, it took place, didn't it? The Maya classic civilization came to an end. It came to an end first in the southern highlands, and then it came to an end in the Yucatan. By 1200, it was gone. It had died. The Maya didn't die, but they abandoned their great, wonderful cities. They stopped building all of these wonderful edifices that they had. They stopped writing all of their codices. They gave up, or something happened. They're still there. There's a lot of Maya still there, but classic Maya civilization died. Then it got worse. I won't go through all of their history. In the 1980s, about 200,000 Maya were killed in the Civil War for wearing traditional Maya clothing or for reading the Popol Vuh. That was if you were caught reading the creation story, that was sedition. And the Guatemalan, it was a vicious time. So then it wasn't just classic civilization that died. You had a lot of Maya die. In recent years, maybe their stories about death and rebirth have come to reality again because of some brilliant people who have translated the classic epigraphy, the writing. We're able to say pretty well what they were writing about. We can tell the stories that they've told. And now it's not an offense to read the Popol Vuh. And in fact, the 31 dialects of Maya are still spoken. It's a vibrant language. They have had a rebirth. So the stories aren't just about ancient stuff, which has no meaning for more contemporary visions. It's a story which the Maya tell themselves, and they are self-confidently saying, we're back. And we're doing pretty darn well after all of this. And maybe we're not building temples like we have in the past, but we are building a very vibrant civilization. And that's enough of a story. I've really tested your patience. So anyway, thank you for your attention. I appreciate your time. I have to ask Brian to, I know he's had his own issues, but I got to ask you for some comments, Brian.
Well, I can begin it. So, one of the things that I wanted to comment about is the E group. And again, the E designation was strictly an archaeological designation, as Lowell mentioned, but it turns out that that was the first group of that sort that was discovered in the Maya area. And since that time, there have been a number of other similar groups discovered at many other Maya sites. And they're always called E groups now because of the original. So it was a common astronomical configuration amongst the Maya. So that was just, one thing. Another thing that I wanted to comment on, I remember on a trip to Washington many years ago, and Lowell, you probably remember, Lady Donya. There's a hotel there now, and this hotel used to be, originally was a place where chicleros slept. The people who got the chicle from the trees. And now they have a village nearby. So it became, instead of a chiclero resting place, a hotel. It's all just concrete block with a concrete fence around it. But it's very actually warm and welcoming. Outside, Doña Maria cooks on a three-stone hearth, which is typical of the Maya cooking technology. And there's also, the three-stone hearth, which is, in the sky, which is one of the constellations. And but outside the fence, we were sitting one night, and the Milky Way was above, and it was like brilliant and clear. And I think it was the first time I'd ever really seen it. It was also the last time I've ever really seen it like that. And, you know, just seeing it that way gave me a really profound feeling of, you know, how they could develop these stories and myths and so on about the ecliptic and so forth, because it's like really right there, it's in your face. And so that's something that was really, I think, significant to see.
Yeah, the last point I was going to make, really, which I then forgot, was that what I learned from the Maya was how interested they were in the connection between the cosmos and their lives. And so what finally occurred to me gradually was that I wonder what we think about the cosmos and how that affects how we view things. That's why I started going to guys like Jeremy, because they're the guys who actually know this kind of stuff. And they tell fabulous stories. I don't know if you want to call it a story, but the stuff that the astrophysicists and the astronomers have been telling us is a new story. And we're really trying to come to terms with that story. I mean, the world isn't 6,000 or 10,000 years old. It's 5.4 billion, right? And the universe isn't just thousands of years old, it's 13.8, although they keep arguing about the Hubble constant, and I can't follow the arguments, but it's 13.8 billion is close enough for me for the meantime. This transforms how I view myself in time. The distances that these guys talk about are ridiculous. Right, the nearest star is what, 4 light years away? What is that, 25 trillion miles? That's the nearest star. I don't even know what 25 trillion means. I can't tell you. I know what 3,000 miles is. I've gone to California, but 25 trillion, that number means nothing to me. So and then we have these pictures of galaxies as they were 13 billion years ago, and now who knows where they are now and what they're like. This has just transformed how we think of who we are, how we fit in. What does it mean? Am I so incredibly small and insignificant and short-lived that, you know, I'm like nothing? Or am I part of something which is grand and marvelous? How do I view this stuff? You know, do I see myself? There's the Big Bang, and so no matter where you are, if you're from here or from China and the Andromeda Galaxy or wherever you are, that's where you come from, because it's all moving out from wherever you are. What does this mean for us? What are the stories that these guys are telling us? And then of course the quantum physicists come up and really blow it all up. And we ask, who are we? And we are struggling, at least those of us in the humanities. And the way that traditionally we solve the problem is don't learn about it. That's the easiest thing to do. And so that divide between the liberal arts and the sciences, we want to keep that very clear, because we don't want to know what the natural sciences are talking about. It's too confusing. And the stories that they're coming out with, you know, we would like our stories to be as true as we can know them. But the old stories are getting tired. But what are the new stories that we want to tell about ourselves and how we fit with the cosmos? And that's why I think this group is such an education for me. You're very nice for listening to me, because you all know so much more than I do about astronomy and star watching. So, you know, I'm a bit of an imposter here talking to you. But my feeble contribution is that those of us in the liberal arts ought to pay attention to the guys in the natural sciences. They tell some really wild stories, in most of our fields in the liberal arts, we talk about the last election, we talk about the last couple of centuries, we maybe talk about what's gone on in the rest of our country or in the rest of this very small planet, and that's it. it's really limited. So eventually we'll catch on. We'll pay attention to Jeremy. But so far, not too many do. So anyway, that was where I wanted to go.
Any questions? Anybody have? Yeah, pretty well. I can talk loudly enough. Can you hear me? Okay. Please don't talk yourself down, sir. What you bring to the table is a lot of what we need to hear. How to get along on the horizontal scheme of things. I have great respect for someone who will travel to another place and be able to look up into the heavens and enjoy what we see in the ecliptic. I'm a real neophyte when it comes to, I can't compare myself to a dude like this, but except to say we each bring to the table our own particular abilities and talents. Please celebrate them. Help us to enjoy. I tend toward the humanities. I lovingly refer to my hubby of many years as Mr. Science. He brings to explanations things that I will ordinarily would never understand. And if he explains it in a way I don't understand, I go to somebody who can help bridge the gap. Anyway, I do have some questions. What is MAW? M-A-W. I saw that up.
I see. That's just in the law series. I think that was the one about the Jaws.
Okay, I get it. Few more questions, if I may?
It's like a big receptacle.
Yeah, receptacle.
It's like a big receptacle.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Where it showed the God, it looked like he was smoking something or something way in the beginning. In the very beginning, it looked like something was coming out of his mouth. Any idea what the meaning of that was?
Yeah, cigars. This is one of the gods who. One of the, they have so many gods, it's really confusing, but one of them smokes. In fact, there's a contemporary god, when we got to go to San Cristobal in Mexico, you could go see Mashimon. That's kind of a religious pilgrimage. And he's this fellow, not a monk dressed up. And you either give him a cigarette or you give him a little bit of whiskey. And that seems to be in the tradition of this particular god who, I'm not sure why he smoked, but why not?
There are gods who smoke, and the Maya were pretty big on tobacco. I mean, I don't smoke, so I don't know, but apparently it was much stronger and very hallucinogenic. But another thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of times what you see coming out of somebody's mouth is not tobacco or smoke at all, but it's actually speech scrolls, which is how they, they're like comments in hieroglyphics, and you'll see some kind of scrolling coming out of there, and it's kind of ill-defined, but it's there.
Anybody else?
I have more.
You have more?
What a shock. You were talking about shaman, king, priest. Were they generally considered all the same? If you were a king, were you generally a shaman? Were you a priest? Or is that dependent upon how you can convince someone that you should be king?
Here, Brian can correct me too. I associate shaman with a little bit earlier stages, more nomadic hunting gathering period when you have family groups or kinship groups of 150 people or so, and somebody's recognized as having particular insights. I mean, I teach at Villanova. There are priests who have insights that I don't understand, so we all know people, they seem to have some specialness, or they do take hallucinogens. But I think that people with imagination also play a really important political role, because just imagine how the incredible transition from kinship groups to multi-kinship villages with larger populations. I know why I should be loyal to my mother and grandmother. That is not hard for me to understand. But why should I be loyal to my village when I'm living with people that I'm really hardly biologically related to, or it's so distant? I've got to come up with symbols and ideas. One of the things that was fun to watch was the incredible skill of women with backwoods. And every village has a style of weaving, repealing, that identifies. Everybody else knows what village they're in because they're wearing that particular style. And that's an incredibly creative accomplishment, to say that, this symbol that I can wear. I don't have to tell you that I come from Philadelphia. I have a Philadelphia t-shirt on or something like that. And so I don't have to announce it. I don't have to talk about it, but everybody knows. And I can tell you that because I'm loyal to my village. That takes great imagination. From my point of view, we're trying to figure that out now. How in the world, who's going to be the shaman now who imagines what I have in common with somebody from China and Russia and Iran and people that I have nothing in common with? So anyway, I think the shaman actually played a great role in the transition from tribes to multi-tribe villages, and then even cities. But my sense was, and again, you can correct me, Brian, the priests, if they're there with all of these observations, all of these cycles that they're looking at, and the cosmos and how that influences them, and they're looking for when the solstice is going to be, and then the periods of time are 360-day periods, so that doesn't correspond to the solar calendar. They're always having to make adjustments. So it takes full-time people to figure these things out, so that the political leader then can tell you when to plant, when to go to war, when to do important things. And so you need specialists who do that. To have specialists means you start to need city-states, not just villages. And the kings are, they sort of overlap with the priests, it seems to me. We like to have a division of church and state, but I'll never consider a division of religion and politics. Those things just go together without a question.
You were talking about, maybe I'll pronounce it correctly, maybe not, called Kawil, K-A-W-I-I-L. And there were a number of times when I would see Kawil, where I would see two eyes together, etc. When I think of Hawaii, two eyes, I think, is there any commonality in the languages in that way, shape, or form? I realize Hawaii being an island, etc. Is there any commonality, or is the I part something that we have put into their language?
We struggle all the time with how to write in English words, the sounds that they have. There are some people who make the argument that there are some South Asian cultures which are similar to Mayan cultures. That's possible because people 20,000 years ago came from Asia. They came across Siberia and then across in the last ice age when we have Thuringia, and then we have the warming and Thuringia melts, and we don't have that option anymore. So they did come from Asia, but boy, that's a long time before. I mean, could they possibly remember cultural symbols for 9,000-10,000 years? It's hard for me to grasp that. I'm not aware of contact with Hawaii Hawaiians. I've never come across that.
Yes, again, I think you're.
I think your first point, which is that this is how we interpret their writings, is actually on point. Remembering that they wrote in hieroglyphs, they didn't write in our English constructs. So a double I probably means something like a long E sound. You can also have a glottal stop like an E sound. So I would not think it would have anything to do with anything Hawaiian. But again, that double I is a construct that we're putting onto their language because we don't know how else to interpret it.
I love the stories of misunderstandings, but on Columbus's fourth voyage, he went along the coast of the Yucatan and he got off the boat and with just some people that he came up with. And he asked them, where are we? What is this? And of course, they didn't speak Spanish. So what they said in their language was, what did you say? Which sounded like Yucatan to Columbus. So he said, they told me where I am. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. So the Yucatan Peninsula is, what did you say? I love that. And then Bishop Delando, who really was, he wrote a fast, it's still worth reading. Now, he's very careful about the diet and the rituals and the language. But again, he really struggled with it because, as I mentioned, he asked for their alphabet, just assuming, of course, that they would have letters. They had no idea about what letters were. So he said, well, what is A? And they were quizzical about this, and they did the best that they could. They were giving him syllables as best as they could understand it. But of course, then they combined those as prefixes or suffixes to logograms, to pictures. And so, but Bishop Landa did the best he could, and he came up with a syllabary, which was then used for a long time, which created absolute nonsense, because then when they looked at Maya writing and they came up with this, translating letters, it was all nonsense. So, and it wasn't until relatively recently that people figured out that's not the kind of language they had. And that's why I think one of the most fun books I've read is Deciphering the Maya Code by Michael Coe. First of all, he was brilliant, but a lot of other people like Linda Shealy and others. The people who have figured this epigraphy out, it's not 100%, but it's 80-85%. We can be fairly confident we know what they were talking about, which has transformed everything. I showed you a picture of Alter Q in Copan. That's where there's 4 guys on each side, 16 guys all around, and then a bunch of epigraphy on top of that. And the first translations, which are the easy ones, are of dates and numbers. A bar is 5 and a dot is 1. So there's a bunch of dates there. And then you've got 16 guys all around there. And Eric Thompson, who was brilliant, I mean, this is about a century ago, he said, I think this was an astronomers conference. I think that's what, and in fact, he had kind of a romantic view of the Maya, that this was sort of our romantic notion of what the French are like. He says this was the Paris of Central America. These were people who love astronomy and culture and all of this, and what all this, as they interpreted more and more of the epigraphy, it was a story of how the political leader Yash Kukmo had come and displaced the previous dynasty and took power. And so the 16 guys around there was Yash Kukmo, George Washington, giving the scepter of power to the most recent guy. It was political propaganda. This spoke to my heart as teaching politics. There's just lots of political propaganda there, but expressed in cosmological terms and historical terms. But trying to figure out the writing has been a 5-century process, and it's really gratifying. These people are so much smarter than I would have never figured out how to translate that writing, but there are some really smart people around.
And Maya writing, by the way, is I I know you said earlier that it's logographic, and that's partially correct, but it's actually also syllabic. And the word endings typically that reflect case and number and things like that, they are frequently logographics, but a lot of what goes into the word is actually syllables. So now, in the last 40 years, we have actually a very well organized syllabary of Maya writing. So we're able to parcel a lot of that out, so that's really aided in the interpretation of Maya writing, inscriptions and so on.
It's not a question from me, but from a friend of mine who is streaming and watching. He asks, you mentioned that the Mayans added 5 days to take the year from 360 days to 365 days. Did they add a 6th day about every 4 years?
Yeah, they didn't have fractions, so they couldn't do it with that. But this was the role of the priest, because they were aware that the 365-day calendar didn't work over time. So they had to make adjustments. But no, they weren't going to change the number of days in the Hab, because that would mean that something is not 360 plus 5. And that was literally written in stone. They're pyramids, of course, unlike the Egyptian pyramids, which are smooth on each side. Each one of them have 90 steps. So 4 times 90, I think, is 360, right? And then there's 5 more steps at the top. So they have a step for each day. And you can't just change that every so often. And this was all political ritual too. This is why I love this stuff, teaching politics. Now tourists love to walk up and down these things, but there it was restricted to the political elites. And the steps are usually kind of tall. So you get yourself all dressed up in fancy things, and you take big steps, and you go up there slowly, and then you get to the top and you carry out rituals, and all of the regular people are down on the bottom watching this, very impressed with the political leadership, and they are going through the calendar, and the whole point of that, I think, is that they are saying, I'm carrying out the ritual which will lead to the florescence of the city. Very often I've won a battle, I've done something heroic, my father was a big shot. And so this is why our city is doing so well, so you can accept my legitimate rulership. That's my interpretation. So you can't change that. You just have to realize, and that's where the role of the priests are, that if you're going to make suggestions as to when to do planting or harvesting, you have to make adjustments over time. I don't know if that's...
Well, they did that in Europe. They did that in Europe too, sometime around. You may remember the year that they did the big. I don't remember how many days adjustment, because nobody was. I don't know what was it? Nobody was doing a leap year or something, and
I should know, but I don't.
okay, but and 1 year they added. No, 1 year they went from one date to a date 30 days later or something. I don't remember what the number was, but anyway, I think it was in the 16th century. Anyway, whatever.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming out here, and everybody have a safe trip home.